Episode 82, director, producer, cinematographer, and occasional actor, the multi-talented Barry Sonnenfeld. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Barry Sonnenfeld. Barry is a director, producer, and writer who broke into the film industry as a cinematographer on the Coen Brothers Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, and Miller's Crossing. He was the director of photography on Throw Momma from the Train, Big, When Harry Met Sally, and Misery. Barry made his directorial debut with the Addams Family and has directed several other films, including Addams Family Values, Get Shorty, and the Men in Black trilogy. His television credits include Pushing Daises, for which he won an Emmy, and Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events. His memoir is titled Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, Memoirs of a Neurotic Filmmaker. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Nice to meet you.
I think I heard or read that you actually moved to Canada. Is that right?
Yes. In 2016, I was in Vancouver filming Netflix, A Series of Unfortunate Events, which I was a showrunner for. And it was a closed set, which means no one is allowed onto the set unless they're working on a show or an executive of Netflix or something. And there was this woman there with her son. And I was joking around with her and she was joking around with me, and I was making fun of her and she was making fun of me. And finally, I realized she must be someone important because she was allowed on this movie set, TV set. And I said, "Who are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm Christy Clark. I'm the premier of British Columbia." And I said, this was October 2016. And I said, "You know what? In a week, you might be very important to me." And the night of the election, Christy Clark emailed me and said, "Are you ready?" I said, yes. And right after Trump's election, we started the process, or as we say in Canada, process of becoming full-time residents of British Columbia. And we now have a permanent residency card. You have to be in Canada 2 years every 5 in total. She said, hire an immigration lawyer. You'll have enough days and all that. And the immigration lawyer kept saying to me, "Who do you know? I've been doing this for 30 years and this process has never gone this smoothly or this quickly. Who do you know?" And I said, "I don't know, some woman named Christy Clark." He said, "Oh, the premier of British Columbia." So yes, we live on a farm about 2 hours north of British Columbia, surrounded by mountains, and we have chickens and all that kind of stuff, a tractor.
Wow. Now, just to get you caught up, we had an election last year. You may not have read the news. So Trump's no longer in office. So we would welcome you back anytime you're ready. And it's funny, actually, everyone gave the threat, if Trump wins, and picked up, I'm Canada, I'm out of here to Central America,
New Zealand, Australia, right.
And I circle back with everyone. And by the way, I'm no fan there. Believe me, I wanted to be anywhere but here during the last 4 years. But no one actually followed through, except for you. So that's fantastic.
I'm very proud of that. I know, because I'm friends with Alec Baldwin, and he was always saying he was moving to Canada if Trump got in. But I'll tell you the truth. I don't think America is in a great place right now. And I'm really worried about the midterms and what's going to happen So I'm not sure there'll be a Democratic president again for a really long time. And I'm not sure there's going to be any more democracy. So we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. But we do love it up there. And, for many years, Sweetie's my wife, Sweetie and I lived in Telluride, Colorado. So we haven't been sort of urban people for a really long time.
Yeah. So what's a big time director, producer like Barry, what are you binging these days? What's on your list?
Okay. We were so sad when The Bureau, we finished 5 years of watching The Bureau, which is this French show.
Okay.
That's incredibly good. It's like the French CIA. So that was great. And none of the actors seemed like they were actors. They all just looked like just normal people. No one was like great looking or any. I mean, there were great looking people, but lately we've been watching Righteous Gemstones. I know John Goodman a little bit because I shot Raising Arizona, and he was in Raising Arizona.
Yeah. One of my favorite actors.
Yeah, so Goodman's great in Righteous Gemstones, and we're very late to the party, but we've also been watching Justified. We really like Timothy Oliphant in Deadwood, and Justified is based on sort of a novella that Elmore Leonard wrote. As you know, I directed Get Shorty, which was an Elmore Leonard book. So those are two things we've been binging lately. And, because I'm in the Academy, we've been catching up on all of our Academy movies. So that's also what we've been doing.
Okay. I'll choose one of those and I'll let you know. I want my money back if it's not.
No, they're both good.
All right.
They're both good.
All right, Barry, you ready to rewind the clock here?
Yes, sir.
Go back in time. I could honestly do an entire interview with your childhood, and I don't know how. I wish I was as self-aware as you are, because you seem to really understand. Maybe it's a lot of therapy if you've ever gone to therapy. But to start with, before we get into the darker stuff, you didn't really have the stereotypical Jewish parents. They weren't pushing you into the traditional professional fields, right? It wasn't you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer. It sounds like they just wanted you to be happy in life, which is sort of a little bit odd.
Yeah, no, I agree. My parents weren't traditional that way. Unfortunately, they were both incredibly narcissistic. So they both led their separate lives, and I was just sort of, I don't know how I came to be. I can't imagine my parents, as no one can, ever having sex. I once asked my father, so why did you marry Mom? And Dad said, I don't know, which is not what you want to hear. It really isn't what you want to hear. But they were not one of those Jewish family where they would say, we want you to be a lawyer or a doctor. Right. My mother wanted me to be an artist of some kind. And my dad, and this is the best advice ever. He had two pieces of really good advice. One was, forget about a career, forget about how you'll make, how you'll make a living. Just figure out what you want to do that will make you happy in life. And you'll somehow find a way to make money doing it. Now, this is from a man who was in Chapter 11 every 7 years. Yeah,
he filed for bankruptcy 4 times, I think you said, as an entrepreneur. And so was he giving you advice that he wished he had followed, or do you feel, sure, he wasn't a financial success, but he enjoyed what he was doing, he loved being an entrepreneur? Like, where was that coming from?
Yeah, he followed his own advice. We were often without electricity or unable to pay our rent. But yet, Dad was very happy. He was a salesman. He was a born salesman. He used to bring everyone bread. I would see people at like lighting conventions, and they would see my name, Barry Sonnenfeld, and they go, "Are you Sonny's kid?" I go, "Yeah, I'm Sonny's kid." And they would go, "I love him." And I go, "I know, he brings you bread, right?" There was this bakery, Jewish bakery called Flakowitz, off of exit 42 on the Long Island Expressway. And Dad would buy raisin pumpernickel and corn rye bread. And everyone loved it. And he would bring butter and cream cheese. So Dad was successful in that he was always happy as a salesman. And whenever he did make money, he and Mom would invest in Broadway shows instead of paying the butcher. And by the way, these are shows like Bravo Giovanni. I bet you never heard of that one.
Nope.
Pearly Victorious. You didn't hear about that one either. So they never were successful, but they loved show business. Dad loved lighting. Mom was an art teacher in my elementary school. So they were great parents that way and only that way.
Right. Well, your mom, I don't even know how to summarize what you brought to light about her, right? I mean, for starters, I mean, you're sort of a little tongue in cheek, not much of a cook. But but beyond that, always feigning some kind of sickness, constantly threatening to kill herself, placing a lot of guilt on you, just constant need of attention, which is just a lot to bear as a child. Was she sick? Do you think your mom was sick?
I think she was probably chemically depressed.
Hmm.
I think she was a depressed person, but I think she got her power through her depression. I mean, she was so needy that people would sort of help her. The first time she was threatening to commit suicide, I was like 5 years old. I was in bed. My dad woke me up. I write about it in the book and said, go talk to your mother. She wants to kill herself, which is not something any 5-year-old should hear,
No.
nor should it be my responsibility. So I brought her my coin collection, my jar of pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters, and said, I'll give you this if you don't kill yourself. I mean, I don't know what else I was supposed to say to her. And, she eventually didn't. When I was going to go away to college, although my mother called it sleepaway school, she said she would commit suicide if I left college. So I went to NYU.
Well, we'll get to NYU. We'll get to NYU. But I noticed something, and I don't know if this was intentional, but as a director, you're probably pretty intentional with what you do. You didn't call her mom or mother in the book. You called her
Kelly,
Kelly.
right.
Why did you do that?
Her maiden name was Kellerman, so she became Kelly.
Yeah.
My dad's name was Sonnenfeld, so he became Sonny.
Yeah.
And all the Sonnenfeld brothers are all called
Right.
Sonny. And she was so unmotherly that I just couldn't call her mom. I mean, to her face, I would call her mom. But in the book, you're right. I pretty much always call them Sonny and Kelly. Yeah.
So here's a really dark chapter. You were very open in the book, so I assume it's okay to talk
Sure.
about it here, which is you were molested as a child by a relative of yours.
Right.
And it wasn't a one-time thing. It happened over and over again. And what really got me, as if that's not enough, is that your parents, I mean, they knew this was going on. They knew, they saw it, and they did nothing to stop it. And it's it's getting me choked up just talking about it now. It's getting me angry, and it had me in a rage reading that. Why didn't your parents intervene? I don't understand.
I don't understand either. I mean, if someone molested my daughter, they would be in jail. And I told my parents later in life that they should be in jail. And in fact, I was speaking to a therapist once who said, if you had told me this when they were alive, I would be obligated to call the authorities and
Sure.
report them. So my mother had a first cousin called Mike Lawrence. He's now dead, who we used to call CM the CM, cousin Mike the child molester. When I say we, I don't mean my parents.
Mm-hmm.
But Mike had a terrible temper and was fired from WMCA, The Good Guys. This is a radio station in New York in the 60s and 70s. And for 2 years, my parents let him live in our apartment and sleep on our living room couch. And later in life, I read an article written by a friend of mine who lived in our apartment building who had been molested by Mike, as had several of my cousins and other kids in my apartment building in Washington Heights. And I read an article my friend wrote about being molested. He didn't say by who. And I emailed my friend and said, was this CM the CM? And he said yes. And we met for breakfast. And his life had been so devastated by this that when I left him, my dad was about 92 at the time, and I went up to see him. And I said, did you hate Mom so much that you felt by letting Mike live there, Mom would have someone to hang out with instead of you? And Dad said, look, Barry, there are three things you should know. One is child molestation didn't have the same stigma back then than it had now. That's a bad answer. Two, your mother was so upset about all the affairs I was having that I thought she would be happy having Mike around. Bad answer. And then the third one, which is like tilt game over, is he said, and besides, I never thought you were being molested. I only thought Mike was playing with your penis, which is like, as I say, tilt game over. And I said,
strike three.
Strike three. You're right. I said, that was okay with you? And he said, well, I play with my penis. And I said, right, but no one is forcing themselves on your penis. And Dad said, well, I never thought of it that way. And I said, okay, see you, Dad.
Oh, geez.
And walked out. Yeah. But I seem to be okay-ish.
I'm going to ask you now about the ish part, because it sounds like you've gone to a therapist. I don't know if that's current or if that's in the past, but any sense, if you're comfortable sharing, how that kind of childhood trauma may have affected you one way or the other throughout life? I imagine you never get over that, right?
I thought I did. I never hid it. I would joke about it. It was devastating, but it was mainly devastating, I think, because what it said about my parents. I was an only child. I assumed they loved me. And yet, how do parents who love their child let their child knowingly let their child be constantly molested? Listen, I'm successful enough that I get to talk to you on your podcast, and I seem to have been successful in spite of that.
You've done okay. You've done okay. Okay.
I make a living.
Okay, I'm going to attempt a transition here, although there is no good transition out of something like that, other than just to say I'm really, really sorry to hear, even though it's decades removed, that you had to live through that you didn't have, parents that were, looking after you, that had your best interest in heart, and whatever, you had to carry with you throughout life. I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Here we are.
Here we are. So you had wanted to become a still photographer when you were young. Why did you want to do that? What was the allure for you?
That's really interesting. For some reason, I've always been a visual person. I started to look at photography books, and there were certain photographers I really liked. They were all street photographers. Gary Winogrand, Lee Friedlander, and Elliot Erwitt were my three favorite still photographers. And I was sort of a lonely guy. I was an only child, and I thought a camera would allow me to observe things in a certain way and be within a scene, but not within the scene, because I'm observing it. So I bought a used Leica at Photoshop on 32nd Street between 7th and 6th from Charlie Pellish with a 35 millimeter f2 Summicron lens. And I thought I was going to be one of those guys. My goal was to both be Jack Kerouac and Elliot Erwitt. I wanted to take photographs and write stories and have them published in the New Yorker magazine. If I could pull that off, that would be perfection.
Given all the craziness that was happening around you, was it somewhat of an escape?
Yes, that camera became my way to be an observer, both about my own life and about street stuff, and it allowed me something to do to get me out of the house. Otherwise, I was in my bedroom just hanging out. Yeah.
So to fast forward a little bit, you ended up going to film school at NYU. And I couldn't tell if you even really wanted to go. I got the sense like you had nothing better to do with your time, and maybe it was a way to stall life for a few years. Was there any kind of career plan going into it, or what was behind that?
Well, I went to first I went to NYU undergraduate school. They had a
Mhm.
campus in the Bronx, and I was a political science major. And I hated college. In fact, I have three daughters, and I offered 50 grand a year to my two older daughters not to go to college. I'd give them that 50 grand a year just to do something else because I hated NYU so much. So I graduate college and I take a year off and I drive cross country with my Leicas, and I'm going to write, and that's going to be my future. I'm going to be Jack Kerouac. 10 days later, I had driven to California and back again and realized that's not my future. My future is not still photography. I spent a year working at Frenchie's Color Lab and living in a bedroom in Teaneck, New Jersey, which I rented with a friend of mine. And I realized after a year, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I had no plans. I knew I didn't want to be a political science major. I only took political science courses because they met Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I could have 2 days off, Tuesdays and Fridays with no classes. And my mother one day, Dad was out of town or was pretending to be out of town. Perhaps he was just having an affair with someone. And my mother said, why don't you go to film school? Film school is still photograph, lots of still photographs stitched together and write it. And you like both. By the way, filmmaking is not a bunch of still photographs stitched together. And she said, and your father and I will pay for graduate school. I should have realized they didn't have any money. But
That's a minor detail.
That's a minor detail. But how are you going to? So I go to NYU for lack of anything better to do. I get into the graduate film school based on my still photograph portfolio, ironically. Had no interest in movies at all. Zero. Never had any interest in being a cinematographer or a film director or a producer. And while at graduate film school, I realized I had a certain talent because of all my years in still photography in how to compose, frame, and light movies. So there were two sought after cinematographers at film school. I was one of them, and a guy named Bill Pope, who went on to shoot the first three Spider-Mans, the first three Matrixes, Men in Black 3.
Wow.
And we were the two cameramen at film school. So that's what happened. I became a cinematographer.
I'm going to circle back later to this talent because I do want to sort of dissect some of this. But, you get out of film school, and I guess you could say you started off your career in the adult business. Because you were somehow talked into filming 9 porn movies in 9 days. So this is one of those segments where, Barry, if I go into any detail here, I will lose about 96% of my audience. So suffice it to say that filming porn is not for the faint of heart. I'm guessing not exactly what you had in mind when you were at NYU film school, right?
Here's the thing. I wouldn't recommend being on a porn set to anyone who likes porn. I'll tell you that. It's horrible. But what happened was I got out of film school with this ability to be a cinematographer. And this is pre-video. There were no video cameras in 1980, whatever. So I figured if I owned a camera, I could call myself a cameraman without being a dilettante. So another NYU film student and I bought a used 16 millimeter camera called the CP16 Reflex. And right out of film school, my buddy Bob knew a porn producer and got us these 9 days of shooting, which meant salary for him, salary for me, and more importantly, 9 days of camera rental, because we had taken out a loan to get this camera, which paid for literally like a third of the entire cost of the camera right off the bat. So that's why I ended up being on a porn set for 9 horrific days, was to pay off a third of the camera right off the bat.
Well, I guess we all have to have our start somewhere.
We all do.
And this next one, I always enjoy finding sort of these threads of serendipity in people's lives and people's
Right.
careers. Not to in any way offset or negate the the talent and work and everything else, but you somehow met Ethan and Joel Coen, aka the Coen Brothers, of course, incredibly famous today. But this is like when they were on the cusp of just beginning their professional careers.
Pre-cusp.
Right, pre-cusp, and you learned that they wanted to make a movie. You happen to mention to them that, oh, I own a 16 millimeter movie camera, and then they just hired you on the spot as their cinematographer. So it's a movie called Blood Simple, which ended up being a fantastic movie, and is held up over all these years. But Barry, you would never. I mean, outside of the porn business,
Right.
you'd never made a movie before. I imagine you didn't have much of a clue of what you're doing here. It's a world apart from doing still photography, like you said. So, how did you pull it off? Like, how did you take to it pretty easily, or how did you go about figuring out how to be a cameraman on a movie like that?
Well, I did. Here's the thing. At NYU Film School, you learn how to make movies by making movies. The classes were useless, just useless. But you did have to direct, produce, do sound, all these different jobs at NYU Graduate Film School. So because, again, there was no video, making a movie is incredibly expensive, even at film school, because you have to buy film stock, you have to have the lab process the film, you have to do this thing called coding, where you code the picture and soundtrack to match. So every roll of film, which is 11 minutes, costs several $100s back in the 80s. So what you learn is to be very efficient. You do a lot of pre-production. You design all the shots before you're ever on the set. You don't shoot master shots. You know what angle you'll be at on who within a scene. Mm-hmm. So because of going to NYU, I really knew how to design. I learned how to design shots. So what happened was I had met Joel. Ethan wasn't there. I had met Joel at a party, and he told me that he and his brother Ethan had written a screenplay called Blood Simple, and we're going to shoot a trailer and use that trailer to raise the $750,000. So I said, I own a camera. Joel said, you're hired. We shot the trailer. It looked great. They were really happy. We became friends. It took us a year to raise the money. And then after we raised the money, we went to Austin, Texas to shoot it. We spent months designing every shot. But I will tell you that the first day on the set of Blood Simple was the first day that Joel, Ethan, or I had ever been on a real movie set, except for in my case, the porns. But the porns were two camera guys, a sound guy who was also the gaffer, and Jeannie, the papered towel girl. That was the entire crew, right?
Right.
So,
right.
But Joel, Ethan, and I somehow, they actually liked movies. They made Super 8 movies when they were growing up and all that stuff. But the three of us designed all these shots together. And by the way, our investors hated the movie. We had an investor screening where a third of the audience walked out of the movie because they just thought, they didn't get that it could be both violent and funny. You know, they didn't get the tone. It's a very specific Coen Brothers kind of tone. Yeah. But yeah, and that made all of our careers Blood Simple.
Yeah. Well, you'd go on to work with them on Raising Arizona and Miller's Crossing as well. Both brilliant movies. What did you learn from them? Was there something about the way that they worked that you sort of took with you and obviously adapted it into your own toolkit?
I think your question should be, what did they learn from me?
That's the follow-up question.
Truthfully, there could not have been a better fit. The three of us saw very much the same concept, you know, in that we loved pre-production. We loved designing everything. We loved how sort of arcane and self-conscious those movies are. The thing I think I brought to them I think it's because I was an only child and still wanted attention all the time. Is I think what I'm most proud of in my career, whether it's with the Coens or others, both as a cinematographer and as a director, is that the camera is a character in all the movies and TV shows I do. That most directors use the camera as a recording device, and I use it as a storytelling device. An example in Blood Simple, there's the shot where the camera is right on top of the bar, and it tracks down the length of the bar, heading towards two people at the other end of the bar having a conversation. But there's a drunk guy laying halfway across the bar. So the camera is tracking along the bar, gets to the drunk guy laying across the, his head laying across the bar. The camera booms up over the drunk guy, booms back down again, and continues on its path, which is incredibly self-conscious. It's, drawing attention to the fact that this is a movie, that the camera is doing this strange move. And I remember going to the Coen Brothers cutting room one day, and they had cut out that shot. And I said, "Why'd you cut out that great shot?" And Joel said, "I don't know. It seems so self-conscious." And I said, "Have you seen the rest of the movie? Why pick on that shot?" So that luckily they put it back in. And many critics point to that shot as an example of how unique that movie was. So they're obviously great and didn't need a lot of help from me, but I think I helped them understand that the camera can be a character in your movie.
That's really interesting. So you would do this camera work for, a number of films, and Big, When Harry Met Sally, a whole bunch of famous ones. And then you got this opportunity to direct The Addams Family. This would be your first time directing, or at least directing anything, big, Hollywood, if you will. So how do you come down the learning curve for that? You've got a whole new role here, a new movie and a new role. I mean, did you have mentors that you sought out? Do you study other films? Were there directors that you sort of really admire, that you would sort of, observe their craft? Or were you just sort of winging it, because you had a good gut for this sort of thing?
Well, here's the thing. After shooting 9 films, I knew my way around the set. I was also a cinematographer, and I think this, again, goes back to film school. I never called myself a cameraman or director of photography. I always called myself the friend of the director, because on those 9 films that I was shooting, I would just as much talk about the acting as I would about lighting sets. Usually after lunch, the first shot after lunch, the actors have taken an hour off, they've eaten, all their blood is working on breaking down the food they've eaten. So they're slow, they're lazy, it's not the energy that they had before lunch. So we'll often do some takes, and the director would say, "Okay, let's move on." And I go, "Hey, you know what, before we move on, I think they had a lot more energy before lunch. You want to do another take?" So I would say as many things like that as, "Wouldn't a 2-shot here be great?" So I was also very needy and only childlike of Jewish persuasion on the set too. In fact, on Throw Momma from the Train, I was not yet married to Sweetie, but we were in a relationship, and I was always in a bad mood the longer a period of time I was without her, and she couldn't get out to LA too often. And whenever Danny DeVito, who directed and starred in Throw Momma, whenever he knew that Sweetie was coming out within a week, the call sheet, which all the crew gets every day to tell you what the next day's work was going to be, would have a map of the United States and a picture of Sweetie in a little car, and it would show her movement over the week from New York. Not that she actually drove, of course, but movement from New York to LA, so that in a week Barry would be in a better mood again. But Kathy Bates and I on Misery would greet each other every morning by saying, she'd say, "Fuck you, Barry," and I'd say, "Fuck you, Kathy." We were really good friends. So I felt like I could do it, but I was in no way seeking out wanting to be a director. I know that sounds crazy.
Well, no, in fact, you mentioned that, and I found this really fascinating, that there have been a whole number of really prominent cinematographers, that have tried to become directors and just one after another fell on their faces.
Right.
And so I would think, like with anything, it would just sort of take time. You've heard the 10,000 hour rule. It's going to take time in so many films. I mean, it was a great, runaway success, your very first one. So any hypotheses on why, and maybe you sort of already unveiled some of it, which is you already were filming through the lens of a director almost,
right,
as opposed to just is that what you attribute it to?
I think I contributed to that. I contributed to the fact that I did look at all the other cinematographers who had become directors and failed. And in each case, they had moved their camera operator up to be the cameraman, which meant they really didn't want to give up the camera, right? Because they wanted to be able to say, no, you're doing that wrong. But so I felt if I was going to be successful, because you basically get one try at this, I felt what I should do is hire a cameraman so good that it would force me away from the camera and to those people who I was so afraid of, the actors, because I didn't know how to talk to actors or what language they wanted or how to. So I hired an incredibly great cameraman, Owen Roidsman. He shot The French Connection and True Lies and many great Academy Award winning movies. So I couldn't say to Owen, shouldn't that 10K be up higher? You know what I mean? So I think that was a great success too, because it forced me to talk to the actors, and what I learned was, in many ways, actors become like your children, and that different actors need different ways of talking to. Some need more cuddling, some need more firmness or strictness, some want to be left alone. And so I learned that if I could be a dad, which I wasn't yet, but if I could be a dad, I probably could be a director. And also the material ended up being very good because I was a huge fan of the drawings of Charles Addams as appeared in the New Yorker. They were very visual. And also the other thing about his drawings, and because I was not a fan of the television show Addams Family, I was more of a Munsters fan. I think what Charles Addams does is he lets the audience find out where the comedy is. They're big, wide images, and you don't realize what's funny, and then you realize, oh, those people are on the roof with hot tar and a cauldron about to dump it on some carolers. But you've got to do some research, some visual research, and that was me in a nutshell. So it was actually the most perfect movie for me to direct, because it was very, very visual.
I'm a leadership advisor by day. I help leaders, I study leaders. And, when I think of a director, you're leading, this entire production, soup to nuts. And we're not talking, Joe Schmoes off the street, but, a number of extraordinarily talented people across a variety of crafts. We talked about the camera as just one of them, but there's a whole bunch of them out there. So I was sort of thinking it's an interesting, analog to leadership here, even in a business sense, which is that how do you find the balance between, micromanaging because you know exactly what you want done, you have a vision, versus just trying to get aligned around this vision, but then being very, hands off and saying, let these people that are better at what they do than I am do their thing and get out of the way. But if you do too much of that, you sort of maybe lose some of that creative vision that you got because everyone else has their own ideas that they're sort of bringing to it. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I'll tell you the secret to directing, which is a lot of leadership. One is all directing is answering questions. You answer about 1,600 questions a week, and you have to answer every question. No one wants you to say, oh, I don't care. Either one of those is fine. No matter what you think, no actor wants you to say, oh, whatever you want to do. The prop guy doesn't want you to say, oh, either one of those is fine. You choose. The secret is by answering all these 1,600 questions. Some of them are really important, like, do you want this actor or that actor? Or do you want this location or that location? Some of them are so insignificant, but they're all equally important. And by answering all these questions, you create tone. And what directing is consistency of tone. The whole movie has to be consistent in tone. And then the next step is hire people better than you. I'm always shocked at hearing about directors being so insecure they hire a bad production designer, or they hire a cameraman who isn't very good, so you can tell the cameraman what to do. It's just what I told you about Owen. I wanted someone so good, so much better than me, that I took myself out of it. I often use Bo Welsh, one of the great production designers who did the Three Men in Blacks with me and a series of unfortunate events. And so hire people better than you, answer lots of questions, and feign self-confidence.
Right. So maybe in somewhat contrast to that, you had a chance to work with Robin Williams on this movie, RV.
Right.
And this is perhaps, using some of my words, but my interpretation was that Robin's, he's so brilliant at this free-flowing, off the cuff kind of improv acting. And it was somewhat, counter to your a little more perhaps controlled or structured process. Or at least, it was beyond the happy medium that you like to achieve, which gave me a little bit of insight into your MO, if you will, as a director. Can you talk more about that? Because that's a case where I assume that this wasn't about he wants to be, told and controlled. It's sort of like, hey, Barry, I got it. Get out of the way. Let me do my thing. And that you guys maybe butted heads a little bit.
We did. Robin is very improvisational and I'm very controlling. And again, it's my job to figure out what the tone is and to make sure that tone is consistent. And also the nature of the way I shoot is I need certain people in certain places because there are these very specific camera moves and all that. And I said to Robin, look, I'll do as many takes as you want. You can improv as any way you want, but I just want to get a few as written. Listen, Robin is incredibly talented, but it was oil and water. It's just not the way if you got to know me well and someone said, imitate Barry, this would be what you would say. You go, no, because that's me. I'll go, hey, can I just try one where, no. But with Robin, I would let him do some improvs, but the improvs were terrible because he would either do improvs where he's Mr. Howe from Gilligan's Island, or he would do one where he was speaking in a Korean accent. It wasn't like he was trying different words. Also, oftentimes, I hate improv because I often find that writers are better writers than actors are writers. And I'm one of the few people who don't think that Raging Bull is Marty Scorsese's best movie, because when I watch those improv scenes between De Niro and Pesci, like in De Niro's kitchen, it drives me crazy. It's just, who needs that? It's not, so I don't like improv.
All right. So do you not like to watch Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yes and no. I find there are specific scenes in Curb Your Enthusiasm that are extraordinary and hilarious and conceptually brilliant. I mean, I watched one the other night where David goes to pitch a show at Netflix, and at the Netflix office, he has because everything's so PC now, he has a black woman in a wheelchair with no legs. Then he has a transsexual, and all the executives are all these different, and then a Pakistani, and it was so brilliant. So Larry can be incredibly brilliant or banal. So can we all. But yes, I do like Curb, but I don't think I could direct the Curb.
Yeah. Was speaking of Larry David, I don't know what show it was that I heard you talking about someone that knows you and also knows Larry David claims that you're the more neurotic of the two. And Larry's a pretty neurotic guy.
I win. I win. So Cheryl Hines was in RV.
Yeah.
We were just talking about, and obviously was Larry's wife for many years, on Curb.
Mm-hmm.
And Larry and I have met each other a few times at Rob Reiner's house. We're both friends with Rob. In fact, Rob and his wife and Larry and his new wife and me and Sweetie are going to have dinner next week. So I'll report back how that goes.
All right.
But Larry and I both asked Cheryl who's more neurotic. And Cheryl refused to answer because she knew whoever was told they were less neurotic would feel insulted. You don't want to come in second. You want to come in first in terms of neurotic.
It's good to be first at something, right?
Even if it's neuroses. So Cheryl was on the David Letterman show, and Larry and I have been on Letterman, and Letterman and I get along really well. And Letterman asked Cheryl, who's more neurotic, Larry or myself? And Cheryl on the Letterman show said I was more neurotic, which infuriated Larry. Cut to a few weeks later, I'm having breakfast in New York City with a studio executive, and I've ordered breakfast. And from across the room, I didn't even see him. I hear Larry's voice yelling, Sonnenfeld, you think you're more neurotic than me? You're having eggs with yolks, and you're having bacon, and you're buttering your bread. That's not someone who's neurotic. And I yelled at Larry, burnt bacon. I
love it. So I guess question about being neurotic. Is that when you're directing a movie? Is neuroses like that a superpower in some ways, or can it be debilitating?
Neuroses is a superpower on the set. I think I learned this from my mother. I call it strength through weakness. If you really rely on people to help you, they think you need help more than you do, and they will come to your aid. I remember needing $4 additional million to finish Men in Black, and had a meeting with the president of the studio where she came to my camper to talk about it because it was on my lunch hour, and I wept in her lap. I may be the only director who ever has wept in the lap of a studio president, but I was persuasive in my weeping, and I got the $4 million. I think neuroses is sort of like, I wear a tie every day. I'm very specific. I wear a tie on the set, always have. My neuroses is often, I have terrible sciatica. I direct from a saddle. So because I wanted to be a cowboy in some ways, I wear a cowboy hat. I direct from a saddle. And in fact, on the last show I got, they motorized my saddle. So I can now, they took, those things that old people drive in Florida, around there, a rascal.
Yes.
They took a rascal and took the seat off, redesigned it, put a saddle on it. So I now have a joystick, and the whole thing is battery operated. And I just can zoom up to actors after each take and go faster, and then reverse and go back to the monitor.
I guess this is how you know when you've made it.
When you have an electric one. Yeah, that's the ultimate. That's the Rolls Royce of directing chairs.
Well, over all these years and all these movies, I think your palette of choice are comedies. Clearly, you're pretty brilliant at them. And you said something I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure I completely understand, so I thought you could maybe help me understand it. And it's this philosophy you have, which is that nobody in a comedy should think that they're working on one.
Right.
That the formula, if I get this right, is to have an absurd situation or an absurd character played for reality. Help me understand that.
I don't like to see acting in a movie. I like to feel it's all real. I think that comedy is only funny if no one's trying to be funny. I like observational humor. I think it even goes back to my love of street photography. Elliot Erwitt's work as a cinematographer, as a still photographer, is brilliant because they're just these incredibly funny images, but you, the audience, figures out where the comedy is. Just like Charles Addams does these great drawings, and you figure out, they trust your ability to find the comedy. So I don't want people to be funny in the movie. I want the audience to think they're smarter than the filmmakers.
Like it dumbs it down if the actors are trying to be funny.
That's right. And if you try to be funny, they put on, the costume designer gives you wacky clothing, or the composer starts using a slide whistle or a clarinet or an accordion or a triangle. The cinematographer lights it too bright and happy. I want to play like, for me, my favorite comedy is Get Shorty. I remember we had a table read for Get Shorty, which is where you bring all the actors together and they read it, years before we made the movie. And Gene Hackman, as a favor, came in and read the part of Harry Zim. And Dennis Farina came in and read the part of Ray Bones. Neither one are comedians. When the table read was over, Sweetie came up to me, my wife came up to me and said, if you can get Gene and Farina to be in your movie, you've got a hit, even no matter what, because they were so funny by just being real. And I went up to Gene and I said, you were hilarious. And he says, what are you talking about? I wasn't funny. I said, exactly. That's why you were so hilarious.
Yeah.
I just like the audience to think they're smarter than I am and that they found the comedy and I didn't tell them where it was. It's why I think that close-ups are the enemy of comedy. If you cut to a close-up, an actor in a close-up saying their funny line, it's the same bad idea. It's me now saying to the audience, pay attention, this is funny. So I like my comedy wider and in two shots and in masters so that I'm not telling you where the jokes are.
Interesting. And this sort of bleeds into, I guess, a somewhat related question, which is when you're directing a movie or TV show, whatever the art form, do you approach it from the lens of, look, this is what I think is funny, like you just laid out. This is what I think is entertaining. And I hope enough other people will sort of see things the way Barry sees it. Or do you try to say, look, I'm not the arbiter, but I do have a pulse on what mainstream audiences will like. And so let me try to sort of filter that. Does that make sense?
Your question makes sense. The answer is never think that you know what the audience wants.
Okay.
It's all about me. Joel and Ethan kept making these movies that were sort of critically successful, but not necessarily big hits. They wanted to make a big hit movie. So they go off and make Hudsucker Proxy. They decide, we want to have a huge hit. They make Hudsucker Proxy, one of the worst received movies critically and at the box office in their career. So they realized, enough of that. We're just going to go back to movies we want to make for ourselves. The next movie they make is Fargo. They win multiple Academy Awards until the cowboy movie with Jeff Bridges, their most successful movie, True Grit. So never try to figure out what the audience wants. Figure out what will make you laugh or what material interests you. But it's always a mistake. In my career, my mistake was thinking that Wild Wild West was going to be a huge hit for, big audiences, and it wasn't. It was in many ways one of the worst movies I directed.
Yeah, well, very few of those on your resume, that's for sure.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Was that Will Smith?
Will Smith, yeah.
You mentioned Will Smith joked that he wanted to take you to a Philadelphia public school and tell the students, if this guy could end up as a successful director on big budget films, anyone can. And I know it was said in jest, sort of tongue in cheek, but there's got to be some kernel of an underlying truth he was getting at, which I don't quite get because you're extraordinarily successful. What was behind that?
If you watch me on the set, we talked about neuroses and all that.
Yeah,
I don't seem like a guy who should be the director.
because
Because, like, here's me giving Will Smith direction. And luckily, we've worked on 4 films together, and he very quickly, he's a smart guy.
Mhm.
And very quickly, even on the first Men in Black, he realized very quickly what I meant. But this is me directing Will. Hey, Will, on this next take, instead of doing the thing where, and that way, because when the next shot and I'm over, and Will says, got it, Baz. And he knew exactly what I meant. And if you ever listen to Tim Burton direct, it's the same way. He never finishes a sentence. But somehow the actors are thinking, I got to help this guy. He can't finish the sentence. I better behave and do what I think he wants. But that was me directing Will. So somehow you hear that direction and you think, this guy has been given $100 million and a crew of several hundred people to direct a movie. Anyone could do it if he can.
Yeah. Well, what would you attribute your success to?
Oh, come on. I don't.
And this is a very fickle business. There's a lot of one-hit wonders out there.
Hard work, perseverance. I have a very specific tone and point of view. The movies all look like I directed them, picking the right material, picking the right actors, and trying to avoid stuff that you think everyone will like. You got to pick stuff that you find interesting, which I managed to do. A series of unfortunate events on Netflix for 3 years was perfection for me, because for me, the books and our show posit that children are capable and wonderful, and adults, whether they mean well or are evil, are equally ineffectual. And for me, that was my childhood. So for me, a series of unfortunate events weirdly felt like an autobiographical story. So I think picking good material is really important, obviously.
Well, now I've got to watch that show, which is going to trump those earlier recommendations you had for me. So I'll start with that, and then we'll go to the other two. I always end the show with this, which is the name of the podcast you're on is called The Art of Excellence. I like hearing what guests think of that word excellence. What's it mean to you?
Oh, you should have told me you were going to ask me that question ahead of time, so I could have come up with a really...
I can give you a couple takes.
What does excellence mean? Hey, sweetie, what does excellence mean to me? She's having a hard time too, and she's really smart.
First time we've had sideline coaching.
Well, she just arrived. I would have asked her a lot more questions. Well, what does excellent mean to you? And by the way, you have such an amazing voice and you're so calm. And I just hear myself loudly just forcing myself into your room. It's as if I'm...
No, this has been fantastic. Are you kidding me? The word has evolved a lot for me, Barry. I specifically chose that word and not the word success. And maybe it's because I feel like I haven't had it, but I think success we define, most of us, around money and fame and recognition and things that can be fleeting and things that I think we feel can make us happy and may not. Whereas excellence is just something around a pursuit, around a journey of stretching and pushing yourself as much as you can. And I think that's sort of where it's perhaps evolved to me, as opposed to some end state, if that makes sense. But I'm not interviewing myself. so I bought you more time. So what do you got?
Wait, now hold on just 1 second. Just hold on just half a second.
All right.
Let me just Google the word excellence.
Okay.
The meaning of excellence. Academic, high quality, superior, brilliance, greatness. I think I'm capable. I think I'm responsible. And I have strong opinions, which allows everyone to know what they're doing. I'm very willing to make decisions. So I wish I could be more. I love.
No, that's there's no secret answer. It's whatever you feel in your gut.
I have to tell you, I love your questions, and I love your segues from one question to the next, and it's as if you're listening, which is so great.
As if I'm directing.
As if you're listening.
Because if Barry can do it, anyone
can.
Kidding aside, it makes my job very easy when I have guests like you. Barry, thank you so much for letting me take part of this. Really enjoyed it.
I loved it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. Okay, don't go yet, please. 2 favors. I ask simply 2 favors. One, if you could please download the iTunes app. You can do it on your phone. You can do it on the computer. Take 60 seconds and leave a review. It means a lot. 2, you can find my episodes on several social media sites, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Find the one that you like the most. Find the one where you tend to have a lot of friends and followers. And if you could please either share it in the case of Facebook and LinkedIn, or retweet it on Twitter, that would mean the world to me. So those are the 2 asks I have. I love putting together this podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.